Welcome to Let's Talk Memoir, a podcast for memoir lovers, readers, and writers. I'm your host, Ronit Plank. Let's Talk Memoir is also a Substack newsletter. About once a month, I publish memoir craft advice, answer questions about memoir writing, and share my latest classes and upcoming events. You can go to substack.com and subscribe to Let's Talk Memoir for free. You can also find me, Ronit, on Instagram and on Blue Sky. Today, my guests are memoirists and co-editors Alyson, Shelton, and Lynn Shattuck, whose new anthology is The Loss of a Lifetime, Advice from Grieving Siblings. Alyson Shelton is an award-winning screenwriter and essayist. Her writing is widely published at outlets including the New York Times, Ms., and The Rumpus. She's anthologized in Comics Lit Volume 1, No Contact, 28 Writers on Family Estrangement, and Root Cause, Stories of Health, Harm, and Reclaiming Our Humanity, whose editor is Janine Olette. She's best known for her Instagram live series inspired by George Ella Lyon's poem, Where I'm From, where she's hosted close to 200 writers. The poem also provides the spine for her memoir in progress. Lynn Shattuck has been publishing essays on the topic of sibling loss for more than a decade. She was a paid columnist at Elephant Journal for 10 years. Several of her essays on the topic of grief and sibling loss have gone viral. Lynn co-founded the website lossofalifetime.com, a hub of resources for those who've experienced sibling loss. Welcome, Alyson, and welcome, Lynn.
Thank you. It's good to see you, Ronit.
I'm so glad you're here. And for anyone listening on audio, we also are videotaping. That is so old-fashioned. We're recording Child of the 80s much.
We're recording this to VHS.
We're going to be recording this to VHS, and you'll be able to rent that over at your local store. No, we're Zooming this as well. So if you want to go to any of our Instagrams or our YouTubes, you will be able to find this and see us as well as hear us. Okay, on that note, can you please share a little bit about your very new anthology, The Loss of a Lifetime?
This is about grieving siblings, talking about our loss, but also our hope and our love. It's 26 contributors, a couple of poems, mostly essays about loss at different times in our lives and reflecting back at it at different times as well. My brother died when I was 10, Lynn when she was in her 20s, other contributors in their 50s. And the thing that was really striking to me reading all of the essays and editing them was how certain themes reverberate through each of our essays, and it was a very healing process for me. Just I felt mirrored and seen in a way that I haven't before, and I'm hoping that reading it gives other siblings that same opportunity.
So I'm curious when you began envisioning a collection like this and when you began to see, oh, this has traction.
I began envisioning it not long after my brother died, which was in 1999. I was 24 and I was looking on the new book website, Amazon.com, for information on sibling loss, and there just wasn't any. Like there were literally, I said this before, but it seemed like there were more books on losing a pet turtle than losing a brother or sister as an adult. So that seed got planted back then, 26 years ago. And I think probably when I felt the traction, I kind of always believed in it. I always believed that there was a place for it and a need for it because there's still such a lack of resources for siblings. But I would say over the past couple of years with working with Alyson and just starting to kind of have some synchronicity come together and encouragement and just hearing other people's belief in the project just kind of made me keep going.
I pulled a quote. I have several quotes, and of course, you're going to each read from your contribution to the book. But in Signs of Life by Cara Jade Warren, she writes, quote, "As this dream settled into the cracks of my consciousness, I began to re-examine the evidence that remained after Keegan's death. I listened less for his voice and more for the inextricable echoes of his presence that have formed the shape of my life after he died, like the empty space around an image. He had changed everything about and around me, and he had done it quietly. I'm wondering what you think people who haven't lost a sibling don't grasp about this kind of grief.
It's interesting because I think if you ask someone what it would be like to lose a sibling, they would tell you it would be devastating. So it's this interesting, it's more society than people themselves. And I think this happens around all sorts of grief. But
Mhm,
sibling loss, I think there's enough space from it being the most horrific. Like we all
mhm,
know losing your child is the
mhm,
most horrific, right? So
mhm,
when you're a sibling, you're not that. And I think people just are so uncomfortable with grief that they just want to push anything away.
mhm,
And they don't want to, and it's that old, I feel like it's that old idea too of like children being so resilient,
mm,
and it comes from that and then just kind of grows even as we get older and we're not as resilient. People still want to find different ways to minimize uncomfortable emotions, and grief is the most uncomfortable. And
mhm,
I don't think it comes from a malicious place. It comes from a self preservation place. Like they don't even want to consider what that might be, and so they just don't.
mhm, mhm. Just too hard to wrap a head around it to
Yeah.
even try to metabolize that, right? So
Oh,
there's another quote, a longer passage that I picked from the Best Grief Gift Ever by Megan Britton Gross. After I hung up with Grandpa, I had to sit down. His words played over and over in my head. I wanted to tell them I was thinking of them. He didn't mean anything by it, but Grandpa's call turned a light bulb on in my head. He didn't think Andrew's death impacted me like it impacted my parents, and neither did anyone else. That was the problem with my grief. That was why I felt so alone in my experience. Once I realized that, I had more grace for the hurt I felt. It wasn't me. People weren't avoiding me or leaving me out maliciously. They just legitimately didn't think I was impacted. The truth is, it impacted me just as much as it impacted my parents. To this day, it impacts all of us. The loss of a child or sibling is life changing and unnatural. So much has been stolen from my parents and me. Now that I have a family of my own, I could argue it's been stolen from my daughters too. So I pulled this out because I wondered how you feel this has impacted your lives as mothers.
Sure, I can speak to that a little bit. I think part of it is that when someone in a family dies, it doesn't just change, like we have our own grief, and then there's also like my parents are were not who they had been before. They were never that same versions of them after my brother died that they were before. And so our family dynamics were never going to be the same. I describe it as like this chair that had four legs and all of a sudden it had three and we were just teetering around. And then as a mother, I mean, I think that just again, my kids don't have the grandparents that they would have had
Mm,
this not happened. And there are positive aspects of that as well, I think. When my dad was alive, I think my brother's loss changed him in some ways that enabled him to really be present with his grandkids in a way he might not have been
mm,
able to. And then I guess the other thing is, as a mom, I've got a daughter and a son. They're both teenagers currently. They are not super fond of one another. They're very different humans from one another. And I've had to really work, I think, to not sometimes I just want to be like, don't you understand what a gift you have in each other? But of course they don't because they're teenagers and I didn't understand when I was a teenager either.
Do they ever ask you about your brother?
They do. Yeah. Yeah. My daughter recently, she's been getting really into music and my brother was really into music
Mm,
and she likes Nirvana a lot and a lot of kind of 90s music. And so I was letting her know that, that she had this uncle that she's never met that liked that kind of music and she just stopped for a second. She's like, "Oh, I'm really sad I don't get to meet him. He
aw.
sounds really cool." Yeah. Yeah, so he is present
Mhm,
in their lives even if it's pretty abstract.
mhm. Thank you for sharing that. Allison, did you want to talk about that at all?
I think Lynn does such a great job of it, and but it is this thing too, which I've talked about in different situations where I think until you have children, for me, I thought a lot about when I was 10, when my kids were 10, and how
Mhm,
young that was, and I think the narrative very much was kids are resilient. People were like, oh, well, you didn't know him that well. I mean, terrible people say terrible things. They really do around grief. And I just was struck by how different their lives would be if one of them died when they were 10.
Mm-hmm.
And just how
Mm.
what a dramatic event that would be. And I mean, that's just not how it was treated at that time.
Mm-hmm. For sure. I think they're probably across the board when I speak to memoirists on this show, we talk about often how people are talking about trauma and
Mhm,
talking about the impact of loss and difficult childhood experiences more now.
mhm,
Hopefully, in a lot of circles, it's not a luxury everyone can
mhm,
afford, but
mhm.
it is becoming a little bit more mainstream. And I hope that that will trickle down to our next generation a little bit. And, I don't know how old teenagers you have, Lynn, but I want you to know that I have a son and a daughter, and the older one is my daughter, and they are getting closer. They even go thrifting together, but that was not always the case. So there is hope. In fact,
That's
they're
good to
making,
hear.
yeah, she's home from college now and they're making plans to do something soon. So there is
Oh,
hope.
that's
And
nice.
I'm telling you, a long time ago, that never would have happened. Okay, so Lynn, you have this beautiful editor's note at the beginning of the book, and I pulled this quote here. My grief was huge and fierce. I didn't have the language to express how much I needed it to be separate from my parents, to have my loss acknowledged without measuring it against theirs. So, we've talked about what it might be like for you to be parents of children while knowing that you have lost a sibling, and a little bit about your parents, Lynn, your father especially. But in your family at large, with your parents, I know you're really close to your mom, Alyson. What is that like for you now? Your own experience of grief of losing the sibling versus their grief of losing a child, or incorporated. I don't even mean to place them in opposition to each other.
I think for me, the process of creating this book really has helped validate it for me. I think probably the main reason that this type of loss is so overlooked is because of what Alyson said. Like we have agreed as a people that like the worst kind of loss is to lose a child. And so it's almost like that loss is just so big that there's not room for any other loss. And yet it's this huge thing that, as my parents got older, like that, it's been like these new waves of grief of like, oh, like shit, I'm in this alone, and I don't want to be in this alone. And I
Mhm.
know perfectly well that there are many families with siblings that don't get along and don't collaborate beautifully to help their aging parents transition
Mine.
gracefully. Yeah, exactly, including Allison's.
Mhm.
But it's still it feels more fresh sometimes than I would have thought it could after this many
Mhm.
years.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I was so we had agreed Lynn would answer this question, but then you posed it in such an intriguing way,
Oh,
Ronit.
God, so good at my job.
You
For
are.
those
You
of you, for
are.
those of you who are not watching this, I am completely being ridiculous right now. I'm sorry.
But if you weren't, I would also applaud that. We all need to pat ourselves on the back
Okay.
more. So I think this book, much like Lynn was saying, it's helped me advocate for my grief. And
Mm,
it was very complicated in my family, and I talk about it in the essay, but we were a blended family. And so my mother adopted my brothers. My father was a widower, and my mother and father had me. So it was
mm,
just me and then these four older brothers. And so there was so much hierarchy of grief happening, which normally happens, parents at the top when a child dies. But it was like my dad at the top because it was his child. I'm
mhm,
using scare quotes. Then my brothers, then my mom and I were pretty much erased. And
mm,
she was so heartbroken from having her grief erased. I mostly caregave her.
mm,
Mm.
And really only in getting this book together was I able to kind of advocate for myself and say, I see your pain and grief, and this is mine.
mm,
And it is real for me, and I have really not had space for it. And it's interesting because my father and my brothers mostly didn't talk about their feelings. So it was
mhm,
also this very odd thing of prioritizing someone's grief who has no interest in it. And me at the lowest was, hey, this is really awful for me. So it was very, and I think most people who are dealing with grief and trauma, it is complicated, right? Nobody is a textbook mourner or, and to be honest, Lynn sort of is for me. Like she's a person who I would look at and think, well, she deserves her grief. There's just the two of them. They were very close. They had more time together, and I find that that is true also in the rape survivor community. It's like, well, she had it the worst. You know, she deserves whatever sadness or grief. And you start to realize everybody deserves it. And there is actually nobody who's doing it right that society will acknowledge and give what you feel is the right amount of space. That the person doesn't exist. And so that has been very healing for me to realize like, oh, we all, whatever space we want to take up with our grief, we deserve. And doing this and sitting with all of these stories and feeling so much compassion for every story in this book and realizing, oh yeah, I guess I deserve that same amount of compassion. And that we all do. And so it's helped me so much just even right sizing it because I was making it so small.
Right. There's a lot of ways you could have equivocated it. Well, I was so
Yes,
young.
absolutely.
Well, it was, not my real full blood brothers. Well, I mean, if you hadn't
Yes.
gotten those messages, I mean, those probably just exacerbated your own confusion about it. When there's no place for grief at the table in so many families and in communities anyway. So that's a real uphill battle. So this is sort of like, I mean, staking a claim here.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Mm-hmm. And, I'm wondering on that note, because we're talking about making space for all of these stories, as you put the collection together and you were reading through the contributions and editing or offering developmental feedback or even copy edits, how did you take care of yourselves when you were so very immersed in this material?
I think I can say that just that having another person, having Alyson on this project with me, we together have, we went through a lot. There would be things that would come up with one or the other of us. Last summer, I got diagnosed with lymphoma, and Alyson, is it okay if I share?
Yeah.
I'm
You,
so
you
sorry.
were,
I
she
didn't
was.
know that,
Thank
Lynn.
Yeah.
you, thank
Yeah.
you. Yeah, I'm in good shape at the moment and everything. Alyson was having really severe physical pain
Yeah.
at the
Yes,
same
I know.
time, and so we both really had to put things onto the back burner for a little bit, and having that other person to be like, yeah, it's okay, like that what you're going through
Mm,
needs your attention now, and the book will wait, it will be there.
Mhm.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
And I think, like we were laughing at the beginning, laughter and making space for the rest of your life. I think sometimes,
Mhm.
as mothers, we feel guilt that we're not present enough with our children or we're not present enough with our work. And maybe because my kids are older, I feel like I'm in a different season where they're actually my children and that life is helpful for me with the work life because I'm going to go be with them. Like I am
mm-hmm,
reading this, I am working on this, and I'm going to go laugh and be present with them and be there. And I'm grateful that I have the space to do both because
mm-hmm,
I think it helps both because I'm not just, you know, so focused on one. And mostly it was validating. And I think the timing of when the essays came in was helpful too, because it was really a work in progress for us. So it was
mm-hmm,
like we would speak to someone or know somebody and say, could you share your writing with us? And it really felt, I mean, it has truly been such a gift. It's been a lot of hard work, like
mm-hmm,
any book, but it's been such a gift to feel also like that you're helping people tell their stories. It feels really powerful. It's something that matters a lot to me too. Like
Mhm.
with the Where I'm From series and just in general, I feel like the world would be a better place if we all owned our stories and felt empowered by them instead of hiding them and feeling shame.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What do you think as editors of this anthology or of any anthology is really difficult? I'm curious. This is sort of an open-ended question about what might be in your mind particularly challenging as an editor, or getting it into the world, or how did you, I'm so curious because I've never edited an anthology, and I know it's probably not on the top of most people's list. Most people who are listening are writing and they want their memoirs in the world, but there's some of us who might be really interested in knowing what's up with editing an anthology, and how, because it seems kind of interesting. You can focus really closely on this topic and curate it. And so I guess I would love to just offer to you a chance to say what you find particularly challenging about editing an anthology or getting it into the world or any part of this process.
For me, it's I don't know if this is where I should start, but I was thinking about it this morning. I When I started becoming more active in the memoir writing community and writing community, I would see that people were in anthologies and I would think, that seems cool. How does that happen? Like, is that some kind of
I know, and
magic?
now you're in 3 or 4.
Yeah, and but it's also sometimes you have to do the thing that you want to be a part of, like,
Yeah.
which is certainly my personality because I've done so many things independently. I don't like sitting around and feeling like a victim. Like, why isn't this magic happening for me? Because it just feels ick and it actually doesn't actually help my creative work.
Hmm.
And so Lynn and I became friends during the pandemic because of like Instagram, because of Alyson K. Williams and Ashley Renard. Like
Well, that's
we,
how come I became friends with you,
yes,
Alyson.
right. So
Yeah.
it's like that magic, right? And the pandemic and
Yeah.
Lynn's writing on sibling loss was really the key to me realizing how deeply it had affected me.
Hmm.
Because, I had a real like buffet of just not great stuff when I was a kid. And so the
Hmm.
sibling loss had sort of moved into the background. I'd spent a lot more time on the abuse because it felt very integral to my life and my ability to have relationships. And so it felt like I needed to really focus on it in order to have a life that I wanted to live.
Hmm.
And so the sibling loss sort of moved to the back, and reading Lynn's writing, I realized how deeply it affected me. And then we sort of became friends and she shared about an anthology idea, basically.
Hmm.
She had some essays and was like, oh, I would be so excited to be a part of that, which is funny when you're talking about grief, but it's true,
Yeah.
right? We're writers and we want to be a part of something that feels meaningful.
Mm.
And then it became apparent that it was like kind of a behemoth of a thing
Mm. Hmm.
to make happen. And so I offered to partner with Lynn, which is, I don't know if I would have the confidence to do that 5 years ago or felt comfortable. I don't even know if it is confidence, but it's also like just comfort with yourself that you're not, people can say no. It's fine.
Yeah.
It's not an insult to offer yourself. And I think
Yeah.
sometimes
And I
people
think,
stop before
yeah,
they
I think
even
the more
start.
you're involved with too, the more you do, the less each particular part is
Yeah.
so heavy and loaded with meaning. So if you're spreading your feelers out, you're digging deep, your roots are all over the place, and you're trying to create new work and know new
Yeah.
people, then each individual part of that doesn't matter quite as much. They're
That's true.
meaningful, but it doesn't mean your whole career or life hinges on it.
Right. And you're not putting as much into it when you even offer. It doesn't
Yeah.
hold the same like weight and
Yeah.
pressure. It's just, hey, here's a thought.
Yeah, you want to do this? Yeah.
Yeah.
You want to write
That
this?
that
You want to do an anthology that'll take a really long time and be really hard on our hearts, but is needs to be, yeah, sure, let's do it.
yeah. And we don't really know each other that well, but we seem like we get along. And
Yeah.
there's also that sort of,
Yeah.
I've come
Yeah.
to realize that if I want to spend time with people, oftentimes collaborating with them is the best way
Yeah.
because I will
Mm.
prioritize that over, let's just get on Zoom and talk,
Yeah,
like,
yeah, for sure.
I mean, you and I do it, Ronit, but not as often as if we were doing a book together. So
Yeah, that's right. And we
make a
used to
note of
do a
it.
lot more of it. So let's get a book. Okay, let's get you in another anthology that we do on it. But boy, you really love doing anthologies, Allison. You're like plotting now. No,
It's a
like
community,
yeah,
right?
me too. And
That's what I
actually,
like.
I do want to say before Lynn answers, if we ever let her speak again, that Allison was my guest on a limited series
Yes.
podcast called The Body Myth, which I'm happy to put a link to in the show notes for this episode. And then you and I used to do memoir
Hmm.
conversations, right,
Hmm.
on
Hmm.
Instagram.
Yeah.
So we have more in our future together. I know we do. So okay, Lynn, please, I'm sorry. Can you address this question as well? Just
Sure.
But do
I mean,
challenging.
do you remember the
challenging.
question?
Yeah,
Okay, good.
anything
I
at all that you
do. I
find
do.
challenging. Yeah.
I think for me, the most challenging part was knowing that this was an important project and like having the confidence through all the no's, all the rejection, all the silence, all the radio silence when we were sending, queries out to agents and publishers and
Mm-hmm.
smaller publishers. And that piece was, I think, hard because I think probably one of the reasons it was hard was because it was kind of the same, it's the same message that as siblings we get. It's like, yeah, that's a good idea, but it's really sad. We don't know how to market it.
Hmm.
So kind of like a continuance of the invalidation
Mm-hmm.
of it being important and worthy of a beautiful book of stories.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And working with Alyson, I think really helped me. We got to the point where we had a book
Yeah.
and we knew it was worthwhile. And while I don't think either of us set out to do this like independently publishing, that wasn't necessarily the track that our first choice that we would have wanted to do. It kind of has become an act of defiance and in a really beautiful way. Like, yeah, this loss is a thing and this book is a thing and it's worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been really empowering for me. I didn't know that I needed that,
Mm-hmm.
but I did.
I really appreciate thinking of it that way, that independently publishing can be an act of defiance. I
Mhm.
love that.
Mhm. And
Yeah.
saying
Yeah.
your story is worth the space that you want to take up with it. And I want to
Yeah.
say also, this isn't challenge, but this is advice that has helped me. I'm
Mhm.
jumping ahead. I have done a lot of things independently, film, this book,
Mhm.
like all kinds of things. And back when I was making a feature film like 20 years ago, Jen Prince, who's my friend and was my producing partner on that and other projects, we just kept saying, just do the next thing. And it's also a 12
Mhm.
steps thing, the next indicated step. And uh, it is the most basic, but
Mm-hmm.
also important advice. It was like, what's next? Not find a publisher, okay? Because that's like a magic wand in a way. What's next for us to get this book ready? Okay, we need to set a deadline to get all the essays. So we did that. Then it was edit all the, and it's a lot of work you're doing with no idea where it's going to take you. But what you want is a book in the world. And so how do you finish a book? And we just kept doing that. And it took, I am very grateful for Lynn's partnership because, and for many, all of my creative partners, because doing these things alone is hard. It's really, really hard. And to have someone you can turn to who cares about something as much as you do, it means more than I can really articulate. And we were able to do this because we did it together and because we just kept moving forward. And the no's, yes, they were deflating, but also at the same time, like, whatever. I mean, such a big part of me is like, just, that's such a basic answer. No,
Mm.
no, we don't know how to market it. Like, can
No,
you
it's
get
so
any more
easy.
basic?
Yeah, to say, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Right.
sad. Really? I know it's sad. Like I just feel like that's so like they weren't digging into it. And I think for me the no's weren't as deflating because they clearly weren't engaging with the content. It was just, like, oh, this is about grief, boo. I don't want to deal. Okay. You aren't for us.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't want to deal with this, you aren't for us. And I think
Mm.
that age and healing and friendship and all of these things have helped me feel more empowered to like, no is not a door closing. It's like just sending you in the better direction. And
Mm.
I feel that way very much. I'm so proud of this book and I love the cover, which is something so many people don't like about their books. And
Mm-hmm.
I love everyone who's in here and and that was something we thought, oh, we might have to fight for certain essays because
Mm-hmm.
of the way that they are and we didn't have to fight. I don't want
Mm-hmm.
to fight for somebody to see me, And I agree with Lynn talking about defiance, but and also like self-acceptance and how what we have to say matters to the people who we're making it for. We're not making it for people who didn't lose siblings, so I don't really care what they think.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm.
that's who you're sending it to oftentimes. So
Right.
So that my advice is just keep going, do the next thing, and find somebody who will be there with you or be your cheerleader or just like tell you it matters when you feel like what you're trying to say is insignificant. It's not. It's significant to you. It's going to be significant to someone else. Keep going.
Thank you. On that note, would you like to read an excerpt of your essay, Alyson?
Sure. This is my first time reading it out loud, Ronit. I'm so curious if I will get emotional or not.
All emotions welcome.
Yeah. That's like me with the poems. Okay. Death is Not the End by Alyson Shelton. My father traveled alone to Vegas to purge, to clean out my just dead brother's apartment, to prepare it for the next renter. I remember that he returned with very little, almost nothing. And the words he spoke quietly and with a gentle shake of his head, almost disbelieving. Heartbreaking to see how he lived. Funny that we were such a neat family, tidy, metaphorical military corners on a bed. Funny because we were the weirdest on our block, in the neighborhood, potentially in our town. My parents divorced but living together in separate bedrooms, with sometimes boyfriends or girlfriends. My mother with a muumuu and tarot cards and runes and freshly squeezed carrot juice when everyone else ironed their crisp tennis whites daily and sipped martinis. Our emotional mess seeped out through words and glances, or simply by ignoring the reality of each other. Michael, my brother, still every time I say his name, it chokes me up. Michael, my brother, always the outlier, even in death. How dare he share his disorder? Not only in the unapologetic chaos of his apartment, but in his untucked shirts and broken glasses. Why couldn't he hide it better? Where was his shame? What did he leave behind that could be passed on to his parents, his surviving three brothers, to me, the youngest, and his only sister? While writing this, I texted one of our other brothers, curious what he remembers of the aftermath. Dad got rid of everything. All I've got are my memories and photographs of him. I remember it a bit differently. Michael left us his baseball memorabilia, his almost new car, his sense of humor, his nearsightedness, his love.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lynn, would you care to share a bit of your piece too?
Sure. This essay is called Equinox. I don't remember precisely when I realized that you died on the spring equinox. It was sometime in that clump of early days when we were still counting the weeks you'd been gone. March 20th, the first day of spring. It seemed wrong. A fistful of salt poured into a gaping wound. You were 21, your life just beginning to bloom. Which one of you is adopted? People used to ask us. You with your wispy bleach blonde hair and startling turquoise eyes favored our dad while I took after mom, olive skinned and dark eyed. Where on earth did you get those big blue eyes? One of mom's friends asked when you were a toddler. From God, you said, your eyes shimmering, casting your luminous spell. Did I envy you even then? How comfortable you were with your own sheen while I hid in the shadows of shyness? Whenever I think about God, about light and energy, and some way in which we might exist after our bodies die, my mind returns to the gleam of sunlight on a bubble. I was 3 years old, standing in the backyard of our childhood home, blowing bubbles. Wood chips shifted beneath my feet. Warm air grazed my cheeks. Colors merged and bent. Forms morphed, liquid to bubble to air. I was entranced by the iridescent colors, the violets and blues, the reflection of light on the filament thin skin. Something about the colors and the light and the expressionless air made me think about death and heaven and invisibility. If I can't see the liquid that once pooled in a bottle and then, as I blow through the wand, becomes a bubble, does it still exist?
Thank you. Beautiful, both of you. Thank you. Yeah, and such an example of how different everyone's voice and writing and approach is, and why all of our stories are necessary and can help. And the way you both start your essays are very different. Your voices are distinct, and I find them both moving. And that's what's in this collection, which at the time of this episode will be out in the world. So I'm curious, Lynn, if you have some advice you'd like to share with writers working on their memoirs or memoir essays.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say just keep going. Take care of yourself, but keep going. If you're working on a big project, find a co-editor like Alyson. Alyson, you're going to get a barrage of emails coming in now.
Yeah, if I don't know you, it's probably not going to happen.
I better get in line. I have an idea, actually, Alyson. Put me in slot number 1 unless someone beat me.
Funny. I want to say, I don't know if this is going to come up, but I was muted, but Lynn made me cry. Her essay made me cry because I've never heard it out loud. It's such a different, I've read it obviously many times, but I just wanted to say echo what you were saying, Ronit, about each essay. I have been so moved by what a mosaic essays created without, I mean, yes, we had some like, hey, what about this? What about, but really just like you said, everyone has their voice. Everyone's loss is different. Even so many of us lost brothers. Boys, be
Yes, I
safe out
noticed
there.
that. I did notice
Be
that.
safe out there. It really is like strikes you the sort of.
Yes.
I also think women are more likely to write about this stuff and
Yes.
write memoir in general. But just like, wow, what a beautiful thing it is together. It's just really like, obviously that's the intention when you start something like this, but at the same time, so much of it is out of our control. And so it feels like a gift now to
Yes,
see
and
it
I,
all
I
together.
remember Jenny Burke, who I got to meet at AWP in Philly. Her piece has humor in it.
Yeah.
She made me laugh, which it's not that easy to get me to laugh when I'm reading memoir or anything to read. You know, when I read to laugh aloud is very rare for me. And some of the pieces begin with description of a setting, and some begin with dialogue or a shout. You know, they're all very different. So very well worth reading. And I'm curious, we're almost out of time, but are there a couple of memoirs or books of any genre that you would like to recommend that have informed your writing process?
I was thinking about that
Uh,
question and what I thought when we were talking about our proposal, because of course we thought about that at length and comps and none of these are in the comps, but I thought a lot about 12-step literature and
Mm,
how we read others' stories to help us find our own emotions and grief and way
hmm.
forward. And also Chicken Soup for the Soul, this a book that is just there for people at a grocery store. It's
Yeah.
just there. And I don't think that, I mean, we talked about meeting readers where they're at, right? The purpose of this book is for grieving siblings to find themselves reflected in it. And we imagine it in a funeral home or a hospice, or we imagine it sitting on the table there. And so it's meant to be for everyone.
Hmm.
And so those touch those references mattered to me because I think oftentimes we feel in order for something to be worthwhile, it must be as literary as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And that was certainly not our intention. We wanted people to be genuinely themselves in their writing, where whatever that form that took. And I think we accomplished that. And I am going to give a shout out of a book that means a lot to me, and it's Encyclopedia of an Ordinary Life by Amy Krauss
Oh,
Rosenthal.
yes.
That book really changed my relationship to memoir because I thought, because I care a lot about form,
Hmm.
and that book is a masterclass in form. And finding what form works for you, I think, is like the journey. We've talked
Hmm.
about it, Rennie,
Hmm.
but I
Hmm.
think it is like an enormous part of the journey when writing memoir.
Hmm. Yeah, I believe that because everyone's always asking that in classes, and it's really sort of it's a circular thing because until you start writing your material, very
Yeah.
often you're not sure what form it should take, and
Yep.
often for me, until I have the form, I don't feel cozy and comfortable, like I can stretch out
Yes.
and explore. So you just as you have to keep going, as you both
Hmm.
said. That's the only way you're going to figure it out.
Yeah, you just do the next step,
Yep,
and yeah, and it takes you
going.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Lynn, how about you? Are there books you'd like to shout out?
a couple that I wrote down are The Heart and Other Monsters by Rose Anderson, which is a sibling loss memoir that more, but it's more than that. It came
Mhm.
out during the pandemic, and it's beautiful. I feel like it didn't get as much of an audience as it really, really deserves. And then Always a Sibling by Annie Skleber-Orenstein, who is a friend and colleague of ours. And what I liked about her book, Always a Sibling, it is so voicey. You know, you think,
Mhm.
okay, we're gonna get into a book about sibling loss. This is probably gonna be tough. And it is, yeah, of course, because you don't pick up that book if you don't need it, probably. But it has so much voice and warmth and so much, I would just say, sibling energy, like
Mhm.
that it changed the way I think that I thought grief books could be. Yeah.
I
Thank you.
agree on both counts. And I want to say about Always a
Mhm.
Sibling, it is such a great example of Memoir Plus done well,
Mm.
Yeah.
which is a genre that, seems a lot of agents and people want. And she does such a great job of having all this incredible research, but then also being so
Mm.
present in the book herself.
That's great. Okay, I'll put all those in the show notes so people can find them. And where can people connect with your work, connect with you, and get a copy of The Loss of a Lifetime, which you are cordially invited to hold up at the screen if you'd like again.
Put over my face again.
There
There
it
it
is.
is, the
There it is.
proof.
The
Very
proof.
exciting.
Yeah.
Yes, we have a website, lossofalifetime.com, and there's a book page. I think that it's lossofalifetime.com/book.
Mm-hmm.
It'll have all the contributors and their pictures and their bios, and very nice. And you can find it on Amazon in Kindle and paperback. So proud.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Great. And how about finding each of you? Are you on Instagram? I mean, I know you are. That's a leading question, but why don't you share your handles?
Hi,
Alyson, do
Alyson
you
Shelton.
happen to be on Instagram?
I still am trying to enjoy it. And and the best way to do that is to do something there that you love, which I
Yes.
do with where I'm from. My handle is by Alyson Shelton, ALYSONSHELTON. And unrelated to this book, but if you'd ever like to join me for a poem, reach out. Don't wait for me to ask.
She's not asking me. I've already done it. She's asking
Brittany
anybody who's
and Lynn have
listening.
done
Okay.
it.
Oh, I
Brittany and
have
Lynn have
two.
done it.
Yeah.
Many of the contributors in the book have
Oh,
done
me?
it.
Sure, I'd love to. Oh, wait, I've already done it. Okay, Lynn, how about you? Where can people connect with you?
I'm on Instagram as well, Lynn_Shattuck, and also Substack. We have
Mhm.
a publication for this book and the community that we've kind of created out of it.
And we have an
Substack is
Instagram
called
as
Loss of a
well, Loss of a
Lifetime.
Lifetime.
Okay, so I'll
Yes.
put all
Yes.
of those
Yeah.
links. They will
Yeah.
all be in the show
Mhm.
notes for people to easily click on. And I know I kept you longer than I promised, but how
It's
can I
inevitable.
how can I go shorter with two wonderful writers and humans? Thank you so much for being my guest and for sharing about your new anthology, and congratulations. And I'm so sorry for your losses.
Thank you, Bernie.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to Let's Talk Memoir. For more about this episode and my guest, please visit the link in the show notes. You can also find the complete catalog of Let's Talk Memoir episodes at ronitplank.com/Let's Talk Memoir. If you'd like updates about upcoming memoir workshops and memoir writing resources, you can subscribe to my Substack, or you can sign up for my newsletter on ronitplank.com. Those links are also in the show notes. And lastly, if you like this episode and the show, please go ahead and share it with your friends, and you can also subscribe. And if you have 2 more minutes, you can rate and review it on your podcast platform, which really does help other people find the show. Thank you so much for being here.